Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, and we're looking at a Jadzi Oracle of Arcavios Twiddle Storm deck. This deck is submitted to us using the form you can find in the video description by Lexa, who says, "The curve is currently a mess, and I don't know if that's a thing that needs to be adjusted or not, and if so, how to go about that." And their deck building restrictions are MTGO legal, which that was something I needed to remind myself of, that the legality of cards on MTGO is a little different because certain sets weren't printed into it. I tried to find a guide, but I didn't find anything too clean. But hopefully we won't go too far into cards that I might think are MTGO, not on MTGO. Most of the suggestions I think I'm going to have from the start should be on MTGO, and if not, we'll do a check later. So, before we get in the deck, this is a great time to mention that the deck list is in the video description, and that I highly recommend you open up the deck yourself so that you can take a look and see what you would change or what you think of the deck. This is a really cool deck. It is a Twiddle Storm deck, which is not something you often see in Commander, where someone has based their entire deck off of one card that isn't a commander or a creature. I like that. I think that's fun. So, who is Jadzi and why are we using them? Well, Jadzi, to make it a little simple, because Jadzi has a lot of text and two sides, as the Strixhaven legendaries often would have. The important thing to think about Jadzi is blue-green, blue on one side, green on the other, and they are like a combo payoff. Jadzi is 8 mana and says whenever you trigger Magecraft, which is with an instant or sorcery spell, or a copy of an instant or sorcery spell, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. So this is rather cool, that if you amass a large amount of mana and then you play Jadzi and then you start casting cards, you can effectively cycle through your entire deck as long as you have enough spells to cast and as long as you still have mana. So, what is the Twiddle Storm aspect of it? Well, for those who don't play Pioneer or occasionally Modern, you might not know there is a card called Lotus Field, and I believe Lotus Veil is, yeah, it's the same thing. Interesting. Lotus Field and Lotus Veil both say that this is a card that taps for 3 mana, but you have to sacrifice 2 other lands to kind of make it fair. Think of it as like a bounce land, but with even more mana coming out of one land. Now, the Twiddle comes from the namesake Twiddle, which is a 1 blue mana spell that taps or untaps target artifact, creature, or land. As you might be figuring it out, you are going to tap Lotus Field or Lotus Veil for 3, let's say 3 blue, and then you can only spend 1 blue to untap it to tap it again, putting you positive on mana, where you now have 5 mana, and with the more Twiddle effects you have, the further you're going to go. So the goal of the deck is very clearly to put together Lotus Field and Lotus Veil, either or, and then start tapping it and untapping it repeatedly using cards like Twiddle, Twitch, Unwind, these kind of cards that will allow us to keep tapping it. We also have a bunch of creatures that untap our lands, such as Hope Tender, and where is our... Oh, we're not playing it here, but Cura's... Cura's... Cura... I can't remember what they are. There are merfolk that says untap. Cura's Follower. Most literally, you can be untap target permanent. These kind of effects that we can use to continuously untap our land, produce a large amount of mana, and start going off. The final perk of this is as we cast our Twiddle spells, they will trigger our commander, allowing us to see the next few cards off of our deck. So I like this deck. I think it has a very straightforward, you know, direction, it goes for a combo win. It has a lot of really fun ways to combo off, from Chatterstorm to Brain Freeze to Mind's Desire, just to set up a lethal turn where you can put either yourself in the lead with a crazy amount of advantage, or Chatterstorm plus Concordant Crossroads for a lethal swarm of squirrels. I like that. Now, our deck builder was asking about the curve. Now, this is kind of interesting. If we come into the curve looks pretty decent, I would say. Maybe a little wonky because it kind of dips and then goes back up. But there's something a little deceptive about the curve. Is that generally when we think of curves, we're not just thinking about spells to cast, we're thinking of spells to cast in order. What by that I mean, if you were curving out, as one might say, the goal would be to play a 1 mana card, a 2 mana card, a 3 mana card, a 4 mana card, etc. Well, Storm decks don't really work like this. Storm being, of course, a deck that wants to cast a large amount of instants or sorceries or spells in one turn. Storm decks tend to want to cast a million spells of varying mana, and therefore some cards that appear to be 1 or 2 drops aren't actually 1 or 2 drops. I'll give you an example. If we go into our 2 drops, we can see that we've got things like Baral, Chief of Compliance, Hope Tender, and Voyaging Satyr, all of which I would consider 2 drops. But then we have cards like Cloud of Fairies, we have Snapcaster Mage, and Hydroid Krasis. I would not consider these 2 drops. For a number of reasons. Hydroid Krasis is the easiest one to describe because it has an X spell, and if you cast this for 2, it will immediately die, so we can easily cut that off. Snapcaster Mage as well is particularly useless if you don't have the extra mana to cast the spell it targets in your graveyard, right? So it's also not a 2 drop. But the most important one for me is the Cloud of Fairies style cards. So this kind of deck has 3 pieces, right? I'm going to say 3 pieces. Excluding the Lotus Veil, we want cards that untap or twiddle our lands. We want cards that draw us, let me see, a good one, like Finale of Revelation, that draw us further into the deck with the mana that we're making. And then we have finisher cards like Chatterstorm, which is meant to be the final or one of the last spells we cast in order to go for a win. Now, you might be putting this together that these cards, such as Chatterstorm, also don't count as 2 mana spells, right? Cloud of Fairies doesn't count because you want to hold on to Cloud of Fairies when until you have one of your lotuses out, and then you want to use it. Similarly, Chatterstorm you also don't want to cast because you want to hold it till you're about to win, and hopefully you don't have to use it to stop, for example, a lethal attack against you. Either way, you'd want to hold on to it. Same thing with Finale and Devastation. Same thing with Finale and Revelation, right? Brain Freeze is another one. Mission Briefing is a Snapcaster Mage variant. Snap is both a combo piece and a not removal but interaction. Weather the Storm is another one. Like if we take this list, and I'm not going to do this for every CMC, but for 2 mana, let's see how many cards are actually 2 mana. Baral is 1, Hope Tender is 2, Voyaging Satyr is 3, Explorer is 4, Nature's Lore is 5, Sylvian Scrying is 6, Growth Spiring is 7, and Azusa's Many Journeys is 8. So despite this set being, can we see exactly how many cards? 11 plus 7. Besides being 18 cards, only 7 of them, I hope that's what we landed on, only 7 of them are actually 2 drops. And to an extent, I'm sure we could probably do this with 1 mana, with Twiddles, High Tide, right? And 3 mana, there might be a few in here as well, but probably less. Frantic Search, Twitch, yeah. There'll be less. 2 mana is probably going to be the point that has the most of these. So our deck builder is wondering about curve and how does one fix the curve or deal with a curve in a deck like this? This would be the first step I would do. If I had this deck in front of me, I would take out every card that isn't actually the mana cost it represents. High Tide is not a one drop. You will not cast High Tide on your first turn, right? So you should be taking these cards out, even temporarily. It seems like you don't have this in paper, so you might just have to use, some kind of word processor or make another deck list like this and take out all the other ones. Or I'm pretty sure, I think it's a feature on one of these that you can change the mana cost of cards. And with that, you can kind of adjust to find out what the real curve kind of looks like. So that'll be my first bit of advice. And I want you to keep those in mind when you're making cuts or changes. You want to adjust to the real curve and not the perceived curve. Like, for example, Treachery isn't a 5-drop. Treachery is a combo piece and needs to be kind of seen in that light. So then, what can we do now that we have that in mind to help the deck out? Well, something I notice, and I'm sure you will notice as well, the higher we go, the less often we're going to see cards that that aren't what they appear to be. Because the higher we go, most likely we're just hitting finishers. Mind Over Matter is an enabler, but it's also a finisher because once you play Mind Over Matter, you can untap your lands as long as you have cards in hand, which this deck is particularly good at. Mind's Desire and Time Spiral are both finishers in the sense Time Spiral allows you to keep going, and Mind Desire, well, it also allows you to get going, but at the same time, it gets you really close to defeating your opponents. And then these are all kind of mana producers or large draw. I want to peek at these ones. One of the things I noticed in this deck is we're kind of low on ramp, which is a weird thing to say, but Nature's Lore here, right? We have Explore here, we have Exploration here, and we have Azusa's many journeys. This is an okay amount. We don't play mana dorks, really. Magus of the Candelabra shouldn't be considered a mana dork because it only functions as a mana dork when you have enough, when you have the Lotuses out, or any of the other cards that tap for 2 or more, such as Coral Atoll. So we should be looking at, like, these ones. We've got 2 ones that tutor. Sylvan Scrying, obviously putting it into your hand and not actually ramping. And I think I did miss Growth Spiral. But it feels a bit low for a deck that has a lot of high mana spells, right? The benefit of cards like Finale of Revelation, Finale of Devastation, and Blue Sun Zenith is that we can adjust them and use them pre-combo to dig for cards or dig for pieces. In order to use Blue Sun Zenith at any respectable rate, we do need a little more ramp. Now, there's a few. I think you should go for a lot of 2-mana stuff. Farseek comes to mind. Let me see. You could even play Rampant Growth. I think that's particularly fine. Rampant Growth. A little slow today. Rampant Growth is nice and easy to put a basic into play. You could play the Kodama's Reach and its cousin, which is escaping my mind, to be honest. Cultivate, that's the one. 3 Visits also comes to mind, though I'm unsure. Did you have 3 Visits here? No. I think it wouldn't hurt to play a few more of these. Something that's not ramp, but catches me a little. Like, I wasn't sure why you weren't playing Expedition Map to get the land that you wanted, but I looked up other decks like this, and a few of them also aren't playing Expedition Map. So maybe it's just a little unnecessary, but I think it's particularly strong. Your deck is built off the back of getting your key cards into play. So having another tutor, one that can come out for 1 mana, one that can be played mid-combo, I think is particularly good. And then with this ramp that helps us to get to our middle ground a little more, I want to be a little put a little scrutiny to cards like Pour Over the Pages, which are cards that are enablers, but they have quite a big, like they have a high mana cost associated with them in exchange for doing more than just enabling. Pour Over the Pages draws you cards and it also untaps lands. Treachery gets you a creature and also untaps lands. And I think that's fine. I don't see that being a problem. But I wonder how often you'd prefer to have Kiyora's Follower instead, where it just does what it says. It's lower to the ground, so you can actually play. It is an actual turn two play, and it ramps you by itself. You don't need your combo going for it to be a good card. Now, don't get me wrong. Where are you? Pour Over the Pages isn't bad. It does dig you into your combo a little bit, and it does bring you positive on cards, even with the discard. But it is 5 mana, and it is a sorcery. In the same way that Treachery could steal you a very important creature to buy you time and board presence, but then I hope you have something to do with the 5 mana you just got back, because otherwise you're kind of wasting the card's main function, which is to combo off with. So I'd put a little scrutiny onto these cards. Same with Baral's Expertise. This feels like an enabler that doesn't belong in this deck. Um, you can get a lot of benefit because it basically gets you a free cast of a lot of your good cards. But that being said, like, is that really where you're failing? Like, I understand bouncing 3 artifacts or creatures can be strong, but once again, this is sorcery speed, and I don't think it does a lot. You have a low amount of cards that just come out and you know, buy you board presence. You know, a lot of these creatures are good, but a bunch of these cards are not. It's not like you're gonna cast Twitch off of Baral's Expertise, right? So I'd like to remove that as well. Also near the end here of the creatures, sorry, I'm all over the place. So I hope you can follow. Vorinclex and Tishana stand out to me. Vorinclex is a very powerful card at what I would consider a lower power level than this deck implies. Vorinclex is just really, really strong, right? Where it basically freezes all your opponent's lands and it gives you double mana. But it doesn't, right? It's not Nyx Plume Ancient, right? Vorinclex says you get an additional mana. That works with basics or traditional lands, like, we can use that with a forest to get another green. But if we start looking at it, like, think of Gaia's Cradle, right? Think of Ancient Tomb. It's not doubling, it is adding one more. Especially a card like Gaia's Cradle, which could potentially, tap for, let's say, 5 or 6 green. Adding one additional green, it's not that impressive. So it feels like Vorinclex is mainly being played for those games where you're just completely out, like you don't have any of your lands that create double mana, and you can play Vorinclex and say, well, I can still kind of go off by untapping a few lands here and there and creating mana advantage. But I don't think that's particularly good, which leads me to think that it's being used for secondary effect in addition. And even that, at this power level, I would expect my opponents to be running Swords to Plowshares, which just kind of ruins Vorinclex as a whole because, there's just no downside to just basically locking down one of your lands to get rid of Vorinclex. I like Vorinclex. I just don't think here is where I would expect him to be. Likewise, Tishana seems like a lot of mana for a draw card because you're not beating face with Tishana. You're just playing Tishana to draw, right? And you're kind of you're a little lower than I would expect for a Tishana effect in numbers of creatures, right? You have a good amount of creatures, but not for a Tishana effect where you're expecting like, you know, I don't know, a token strategy or a really go wide deck. And yeah, there is I think I saw somewhere a spell that turns all your lands into creatures. Maybe that was on another list and I'm confusing the two. Rude Awakening. No, Rude Awakening. So you could turn all your creatures. No, that's or. That's not and. That's an entwine card. Okay. I guess you could entwine this, turn all your creatures into 2/2s, and then play Tishana, but that also feels particularly weak. Like comparing it to your other 7 drops of Nyxbloom Ancient, which just triples your mana, or Palinchron and Great Whale, both of which untap and allow you to keep going. I think I think there's a big distinction. Sereth also feels like a strange, include over something like Kiyora's Follower, which there's just more and more of Kiyora's Follower style cards. If you just look up untapped land, you can find tons and tons of these. And so to use Sereth, I imagine you're using it for the hexproof ability to give your commander hexproof while you're going off. I don't know to what degree how effective that is. There's other ways to stop that, but I can see the benefit of melding those two cards together. So these cards here kind of stick out to me. The rest are really good. I like them. I don't see any problem with that. Over here in our sagas, where are our enchantments? Azusa's Many Journeys. I keep coming back to this card when I'm looking through your list. It feels okay. It feels just okay. Where okay, the first it does at least one thing that I like here, where it lets you play. It's like an explore effect without the draw card, and then later it gains you life, which is kind of negligible in a 40 life format. And then when it flips, oops, let me see. There we go. Move my mouse through the maze. Whenever Likeness of the Seeker becomes blocked, untap up to 3 lands you control. Who's gonna block this? Right? Like, what board state are you in that you're going to block? Like, it's a 3/3, right? They're just going to let it through, and a 3/3 unblockable does nothing for you. And even more, if I would block, what does that do for you? Let's say you have Lotus Bloom and 2 other lands. Let's just, for the sake of it, say that they're just forests. You tap out to cast, I don't know, Pour Over the Pages, and then you attack me with the Likeness of the Seeker. I block, you untap your lands, you have another 5 mana. Like, that is scary, but like, not really. It's not enough for you to go off. You can't keep the mana in between the phases, so it's not like you can float the mana and then untap it. I guess you could, but even then, your instants are kind of low, right? The way I think it would be the best play of this would be you attack with you keep all your mana untapped, you attack with it, gets blocked, triggers on the stack, you float all your mana, it untaps, you float the new mana, and then you cast like Blue Sun Zenith. And for 10, that's like 7 cards. So maybe in that sense it's okay, but it stands out. I don't think it's particularly strong here. It just does a mix of some weird things here that I think you can do better. The other thing I'd like to bring a little attention to, I feel like we're missing a little bit of interaction. I think as being generous, I would say you have no interaction unless I'm missing something. And you have Force of Will. And don't get me wrong, I understand why you don't have interaction. This is an all-in combo deck, but you have 100 cards. I think you can afford to play some interaction. Now you could be playing amongst friends who don't have anything to mess with you, but you're playing on MTGO, and if you're playing at a power level that this deck, actually seems to function on, well, you have to play around Blood Moon. Because if you brought this, if I was playing with you weekly, I would bring Blood Moon. Not just because your deck folds to it, but because that's the power level I would see this deck being at. So I'd expect you to be able to deal with Blood Moon. You have certain things. I think the other one is Back to Basics, right? Basics in blue. Yeah, Back to Basics also stops them from untapping, which is slightly better, that you're slightly stronger against because you can force those untaps. But these cards are particularly strong against you. Mass Land Destruction feels particularly strong against you because if they can get, like, you have Ewit and Ranumap Excavator to get them back, but it does, if there's enough pressure on you, it gets tricky for you to be able to do that. And so I'm going to suggest starting off, at least you should be playing Beast with it. It's in your colors. It's a very strong card. It just deals with anything, right? And at the same time, Veil of Summer or Autumn's Veil, I believe. Yeah, both of these cards do very similar things. Obviously, Veil of Summer, uh, apparently the better season, lets you draw a card, but Autumn's Veil is very, very cheap, and it just lets you straight up say no more cards can be countered this turn, which I think is particularly useful. I see it's cheap on MTGO, so you should be fine there anyways. But both of these, on the turn you want to go off, can be incredibly useful to stop counter spells, which is really the main way you're stopped when you're ready to go off. A few other ones that come to mind. I wouldn't mind Nature's Claim, just as another way to get rid of enchantments or artifacts that can shut you down. Um, Especially if we have. I'm trying to think of the other effects that would be in play. Because Pithing Needle doesn't actually stop our combo, right? Because it's mana abilities. Does Revoker do that? Yes, this one can. So if someone played Phyrexian Revoker and named one of your like Lotus Field, this would actually stop it, as opposed to Pithing Needle, which is really cool. So oh, it's non-land card name. Okay, I have to read all of it. Okay, so Phyrexian Revoker wouldn't work. But regardless, I think it would be helpful to have that kind of interaction, like Nature's Claim and the like. And I think even just a few of them is fine, just to protect yourself, to deal with your opponents who proactively um, like put down pieces to stop you. Because what do you do against Thalia, Guardian of Thraben? This is a very, very strong card against you, and it's a card at higher power levels you should expect to see, much like Blood Moon. And this deck kind of has a really hard time with it. It skews the math against you, and it makes it really difficult for you to combo off. And I believe you have no way of dealing with it outside of Snap. Snap, Force of Will, I think, are your only real cards. Unwind, I keep thinking of as an actual enabler and not a counter spell. I think, yeah. So without Beast Within, I think even just one or two unsummon effects, um, oops, that wouldn't hurt. I think there's another free one. I can't remember what it is. So another one of these could be helpful. And then I would suggest a single fog is another really nice kind of inclusion because it allows you to then survive a turn. You'll have to excuse me. I'm letting my cat into the room because he wants to come in. So fog can stop a lethal attack coming at you, and since you don't have board clears, that can buy you the time you need to go and combo off the next turn. Okay, those are mostly my suggestions. This one was a little looser because when it comes down to it, I think the first thing you're going to need to do is re-examine the curve. I think if I wanted to sum it up, it feels like you do have a bit of a high mana problem. Cards like Vorinclex, Tishana, cards like Treachery, cards like Pour Over the Pages, Baral's Expertise, all seem to stand out as cards that don't do enough. Even Renin 7 and Kiora, Master of the Depths, both stand out as being a lot of mana, whereas you can get these effects for much cheaper. So I would put my mind to that and see what you can find and what you can change. And then, like I said before, I would consider bringing in a bit of interaction, especially with against artifacts and enchantments, but maybe an unsummon here or there to deal with Thalias or other creatures that can potentially stop you. One other inclusion I just remembered is that I think you should be playing Dryad Arbor. right? You have Finale of Devastation and Green Sun Zenith, and I think you want to be able to cast that for 0, with X being 0 just to get another ramp. So I would like you to play a Dryad Arbor. And I think that's it. All right. If you make another draft of this deck, I would love to see it. I want to see how this deck kind of evolves, especially with the curve. I hope none of the cards I suggested aren't on MTGO. Or sorry, yeah. I hope that they are not on MTGO. I think they all are. These are all general staples of the format. So, and I've heard them, and if they weren't on MTGO, I think I would know by now. But if I have, I apologize. If you want to send me the next draft of the deck, I'd love to see it. Or if you want to send me a deck list of any deck you'd like me to look at, please use the form in the video description below. And I'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube thing. The channel is growing, and any help that you have to help our channel grow is very, very kind of you. This deck is interesting to me because I don't tend to play blue and green, and I don't tend to play storm decks. So bringing it all together has shown me a really cool deck idea that I really do like. And I'd love to see this deck in action, and I'd love to see what kind of play group you play this deck against, because I feel like this deck could be really, really strong. And I would like to see what kind of decks you pit it against often. All right, good luck.